Right off the bat, I want to give a disclaimer for some serious topics discussed in this video, including topics of sexual assault, abuse, bulimia, mentions of mental illness such as OCD and depression, drug use, and suicide. Oh yeah, we're going there. If any of these topics make you feel uncomfortable, this video isn't for you, and I'll leave a playlist of my normal videos where I discuss more savory topics in the description below. So for those of you who don't know, I'm a theater kid. Shocking, I know, but the kid who normally talks about vapid entertainment on the internet for hours at a time without any financial incentive might be a part of a group of people that frequently do entertainment for no one but themselves. Well, my drama club troupe and I were all on our way to the District 1 Act Thespian Festival, an event where all the schools in our district take their drama clubs to present a one-act play that they have been working on, and it was pretty fun. Our school performed an amazing one-act musical called 21 Chump Street, which was written by the brilliant Lin-Manuel Miranda, and it was an overall very fun experience. That is until one school went up and performed the topic of today's video. A little-known one-act play written by Angela Hill called Fighting Demons. Now, the performance itself was rather good. The actors really did their best, and it wasn't as laughable as it could have been, but the only reason why it could have been worse is because the play is bad. Like, really bad. This play is bad for a multitude of reasons, and we'll dive into them shortly, but let's first talk about the author, Angela Hill. Angela Hill is not primarily a writer. Instead, she focuses on choreography. A choreographer from the age of 12, her biography on the Hewer Publishing website says that she prides herself on, quote, making non-dancers dance. Hill has been directing at her local school and community since the early 90s and has been the recipient of awards such as the YWCA Woman of the Year Youth Advocate Award. This is all to say that Hill's main talent isn't her writing, which isn't inherently a problem. I 100% believe that anyone can learn how to write gripping, compelling, and thought-provoking stories. An issue arises, however, when that inexperienced writer tries to tackle subjects that they are in no way prepared to tackle, such is the case with Fighting Demons. You can really gather a lot of the sentiment a writer has for their play by the way that they talk about or advertise it. And while Hill doesn't seem to have any social media, I did find her YouTube through her biography page and found a video she made promoting Fighting Demons. Let's take a look. Now, while some of this is undeniably very funny, as the forced edginess is laughable in some cases, this is still an interesting peek into what Hill thought this play to be. Instead of a serious exploration of these struggles that real people face, this is the story equivalent of the emo kid who sits in the back of the class listening to My Chemical Romance all day and thinking that he's a werewolf. Not only is this sort of approach to these topics inherently disrespectful to people who have to deal with these struggles every day, but it also starts to border on making mental illness look cool. We'll talk about that later when we discuss the contents of the play. Speaking of which, the atmosphere of this play is pretty great, and the fluidity of the set is neat. Since this play is set in a limbo of sorts, the stage can be as empty or as busy as you'd like, with no required set pieces. This is a surprisingly effective way of doing small budget storytelling, which is cool. There are moments in the play where characters will use the last word of another character's line to start theirs, which keeps up the pace of the scene, and it's pretty creative to see where each part fits. The demon dance, which is a required prepared part of the script, or at least it's in the script for those who want to do it, is pretty cool, and it speaks to Hill's strength as a choreographer. And in the production that I watched at the festival, the demons would be behind the cast reenacting their trauma that the characters suffered, which was a creative way of showing their past. Wait, that's it? Yup, that's all the good things I have to say about fighting demons. It's truly baffling to me how people seem to like this as much as they did. Even under the comments of Hill's super edgy video, people are complimenting how great this play is, and it shocks me a little. I mean, I can't be the only person who sees this play as bad. Can I? Hopefully those people who like this play and are watching this video will hear me out at least, as my goal here isn't to tear down another writer, but to try and explain why stories like fighting demons can be truly detrimental to not only the understanding of mental illness, but to people dealing with mental illness as well. One last thing, if this play means something to you, if it managed to connect with one of your personal experiences, that's great. I would never try to take that away from anyone, and that's not what this video is supposed to be doing. The point here is to try to explain why it couldn't connect with me in the way that it connected with other people. So with necessary disclaimer out of the way, let's start talking about this play. Let's start with some basic issues I have with the script. This serves a bit of an educational purpose for those looking to write plays, so I feel it's necessary to include. Now let's go over basic script formatting for those unaware. This is not how every script is written, of course, but typically there are two ways you'll see a script laid out, either like this or like this. This first one is one that I wrote myself, and the second one is from Fighting Demons. Obviously, you could probably tell which one I like more, but both are valid, so let's analyze this second layout. Plays written like this will often have the names of the characters in all caps next to their respective lines with some sort of colon or dash in between showing that the line belongs to that character. This play in particular also has subheadings for each scene that include names that correspond with this scene, except for Scene 1, which is weird. Under these subheadings, there are stage directions in bold letters, which is odd because not all the stage directions are like this. I assume the point is to show that this is how the scene is supposed to start or something, but some clarification would be nice. Normal stage directions are given in italics with parentheses placed around them with the character's name in all caps. This is fine, if not a bit superfluous. If the block of text doesn't have a character attached to it, people tend to assume that it's a stage direction, but the idea itself isn't inherently awful. Now that we've talked about some of the basics of script formatting, I'm going to tell you the most important rule when writing for the stage. You are not the director. As a writer, it is not your responsibility to write specific instructions for how the story is meant to be portrayed. Essentially, as soon as the script starts to look like director's notes, something's wrong. Additionally, these directions should avoid redundancy if possible. Here's an example of said redundancy. Quote, Eli unties characters in the following order: Alice tries Cindy, Milton, Jezz, Cyrus, Tabitha, Arnold, Lilah, and Will. This stage direction is fine, seeing as Eli is interacting with these characters as he unties them, making this order necessary to know. However, this chunk of text is immediately made redundant before every interaction. The stage directions specify again that Eli unties the character he's talking to. Stuff like this is nitpicky, but it also wastes space and makes your script feel cluttered and not well thought out. Where stage directions get really frustrating is with Scene 5, Escape. This scene frustratingly has stage directions that are way too specific. Things like, as Demon exits, he/she pulls Will off stage right, and as Demon exits, he/she pulls Milton off stage left. First of all, they is a pronoun you can use, Hill. But more importantly, you should never as a writer be specifying what side of the stage a character exits from. That's the director's job! It is ultimately unimportant to the story, and if it has any thematic reasons, which I couldn't find, but I'm sure it could be true, that should be part of the author's note explaining what it means and letting the director decide what best fits. This gets worse when in Scene 6, Grace and Redemption, the stage directions get so incredibly specific that it starts to feel like this was the version she used to direct the play and just accidentally sent it in to get published. Quote, enter Milton stage left and Will stage right. To me, this defeats the whole purpose of writing a play as opposed to a short film. Part of the appeal of writing for the stage is the thrill of seeing a different director's interpretation of your work. You could see 2 productions of Pippin and have a completely different experience depending on what the director chooses to emphasize or not in their performance. Some may choose to emphasize the spectacle of the Cirque-type show that's being produced, while others may choose to emphasize the creepiness of the leading player and their company. All of these differences would be made through interactions between the characters physically, as verbally they have to stick to the script. In fighting demons, this opportunity is taken away. Productions can't incorporate their own blocking to emphasize the relationships between the characters. They instead have to stick rigidly to the defined motion granted by the script. This is a huge sign of an immature playwright. The only interesting scene from the production of this that I watched was in Scene 3, Personal Battles. This is not in the script, but throughout the scene, the demons were interacting with the characters to reenact their trauma. This actually goes against the script as the demons were supposed to be off stage, but I think it's telling how the most interesting parts of the whole venture was a part that contradicts what the script said. Now I know what you might be saying. Cribby, you're already 6 pages into your script and you haven't even discussed the story yet. Well, first of all, hold up, because I'm just a pile of bones that honestly just wants to talk about stuff that interests him. But the real reason why I haven't yet is that I'm doing you all a favor. The story gets even worse. This story follows 10 kids. Eli, Milton, Cindy, Lilah, Alice, Tabitha, Arnold, Will, Jezz, and Cyrus, as they wake up in a black void. Now, all of the characters are tied up except for Eli, who unties all of them. After wondering where they are and briefly setting up their internal conflicts, each character monologues about how shitty their life is. We'll talk more about how these stories are terrible later, but for now the only important one is Eli's. This story describes him going to fish with his father's fishing rod, losing his father's lure, and looking for it in the river, getting stuck, and then saved by his older sister Grace. Unfortunately, Grace died saving him, and he carries around that trauma, vowing to try and save everyone else. As he attempts to do this, more of these people decide to leave and stay in their trauma, then follow Eli and get out, prompting a conversation between Eli and Grace where she tells him that he can't save everyone and that he needs to let go. Eli saves Cindy and leaves the rest of these people in their self-pity. This is a basic synopsis of the play, and I feel it's necessary to understand this as the play has a lot of fluff. So a clear-cut summary is important for the purposes of our discussion. On the surface, this is a fine story, if not a bit confusing, as the question of where are they is never answered, and while it could be argued that that's part of the point, I highly doubt it, as there was no real advantage to that decision, so it just feels stupid. Regardless, let's talk about some of these writing issues that I'm so fond of pointing out. While this play has a mostly dramatic tone, there are moments when Hill decided it would be a good idea to inject some humor into this depression sandwich. Levity in serious plays is not a bad thing in and of itself, and in certain cases, it's necessary to ensure that your audience isn't going to walk out of the theater feeling like they just took 20 liters of Xanax. Unfortunately, while most plays do this by adding a character or situation that feels ridiculous to laugh at in a dark story, for example, The Women of Lockerbie by Deborah Revort, a play that follows a couple called the Livingstons as they visit Lockerbie on the 7th anniversary of the real Pan Am 103 flight that crashed, killing 270 people. Since this play not only tackles such heavy themes, but also is based on a true story, the story is dark and depressing. In Act 2, they introduce the comic relief of Hattie, a character who, despite being the comic relief, is not only making jokes and being quirky, but instead actively moving along the story. Comedy in Act 2 is primarily meant to do that. Take this scene between Bill Livingston and a US official stationed in Lockerbie named George Jones. Throughout the scene, Bill is trying to get George to see the way the people of Lockerbie see, to see the destruction and chaos of Lockerbie, and along with that, show George the good that he's capable of doing. George refuses to see this, and so Bill tries to appeal to George's emotions, playing out a picture of his son at a baseball game, leading to this exchange. And here's a ticket stub from the Yankees game I took him to on his last birthday. I just found this a few minutes ago in the pocket of my coat. Funny, I haven't worn this coat in years. Well, hey, that's great. So your son was a Yankees fan? Hell of a team, the Yanks. Hell of an owner. I like George Steinbrenner. Always have, always will. Man knows how to run a team. Yes, he does. The comedy of this scene isn't just the random outburst from an out-of-place line from George, but instead it plays off the tangible parts of George's character to make a scene that, even if you don't find it particularly funny, is still used to characterize and advance the plot. Well, how does fighting demons stack up? I'll give you 3 poorly. It stacks up super poorly.
Now, one could argue that what I'm about to bring up serves to characterize these people. Some people cope by telling jokes, and so these moments could be fleshing out a bigger character. One would be wrong, but I'll humor them for a second. Let's look at the examples of this happening in the script. Now, to give credit where credit is due, one character does use comedy in this play to further explore facets of themselves. That character is Cyrus. Cyrus commonly makes fun of other people's struggles, like when he laughs at Arnold describing his experience getting bullied while downplaying the extent of his own problems, like when he follows Lilah's account of having gone to chemotherapy by claiming that he was also doing, quote, chemotherapy,
even though he was obviously doing drugs.
These instances are effective. We get the strong sense that Cyrus is a dick. The problem with this in particular is that these moments of characterization don't justify themselves. There's no reason for Cyrus to be such a prick, and in writing him as one, Hill ends up insulting people who have serious mental illnesses. Take this line that Cyrus says to Alice, quote, "Oh, I forgot, a little brownie goes in, but..." and then he makes vomit noises. Now let me tell you the context of this line. He's saying this line to a girl who is struggling with bulimia. For those of you who are unaware, bulimia nervosa is a serious eating disorder where people who are self-conscious of their body weight will binge and purge, a cycle where they eat as much food as they can to get daily intake, but then immediately go to the bathroom and vomit it all out. This can lead to serious short-term and long-term health effects. I'll leave a webpage from Koru Springs in the description that goes more in depth about this topic. However, the TLDR of this whole thing is that this is an issue that should not be taken lightly, and seeing this disorder be described in this way is quite frankly disgusting. Once again, one could argue that this is worth it and that Cyrus's characterization as an asshole is too important to be restricted by basic respect for people suffering from an eating disorder. One should stop talking. But again, I disagree with this point entirely. What does this character trait actually add to the story? Is there an arc where Cyrus grows to be less of a dick? Is there a purpose at all? No, there's not. My only guess is that Hill wanted a character that people could point to as the mean one and hoped that this characterization would excuse the rest of the cast of needing such characterization. Unfortunately for her, it does not. Let's move on to the next example. Jezz. Jezz seems to have a sarcastic attitude with her comedy that is displayed 3 times in the script. Most egregiously, Lilah, the person from earlier who was suffering from cancer, cracks this tasteless joke. Quote, "Eli, I know I can't win this fight, and I'm okay with it. I can live with it." Laughs. No pun intended.
When we were watching this play in the Thespian Festival, the guy who was sitting next to me turned to me and said, "I hate my life," when she said that.
This is the only time in the entire script where Lilah makes any sort of joke. It is not part of her established character. This line feels like Hill just thought of a joke while she was writing this play and thought it was so funny that she had to put it in despite it not being funny and not fitting the established character that Lilah already fucking had. Actually, the more accurate way to describe it is the character that she didn't have. We'll talk more about that later, but for now, let's move on to... There's a popular rule that video essayists always bring up in film. Show, don't tell. And while it's most commonly cited in movie discussion, I believe this rule ideally should be applied to any form of storytelling. This can even be done in books. Instead of saying that the sun was shining, an author can make a story far more engaging by painting a picture of a shining sun through vivid metaphor and imagery. This rule, unsurprisingly, also applies to plays, which makes sense as the person who penned this rule was a Russian playwright named Anton Chekhov, also famous for the Chekhov's gun rule. Plays are still a mostly visual medium, meaning that a play should easily and ideally be able to incorporate this rule and broadcast these emotions through the actions and reactions of the characters. It counts far more in a play to have a character look down at the ground and talk slowly in a dejected tone than hearing the character simply say they are sad. Fighting demons takes this important and beautiful pillar of storytelling and curb stomps it with giant monologues of characters just explaining their entire story in the most "I'm 14 and this is deep" way. There is very little in the realm of visual storytelling happening on the stage, as most of the characters don't really have much personality and therefore only exist to represent the kind of sadness that they were specifically crafted to represent. Even Cyrus, the one character who seemed to have personality outside of his character trait, eventually loses that personality and only focuses on his drug problem for the rest of the script. Wow, I'm really surprised that the character of Cyrus, who we've established hates hearing about other people's trauma and will make fun of it, is sitting quietly and listening to other people's trauma.
They ditched his rudeness, which was a trait that we were allowed to find out for ourselves, and instead focused on the trait that is much less interesting because we were told about it and not shown it. Although that's not to say that being a dick is an interesting trait in and of itself. The way I like to think about it, characters should be like a puzzle. Part of the experience of consuming media is seeing the pieces of this puzzle, the individual moments of the character, and putting them together to fully understand who these people are. In making these characters recite long monologues of everything they're supposed to be, fighting demons actively robs the audience of this opportunity and instead force feeds the character traits down the audience's throats. The only fun part of this play when we watched it, again as previously stated, is the demons reenacting the monologues as the characters said them. This once again contradicts the script's specific instructions where the demons aren't supposed to re-enter until scene 4 fighting with demons. So, now we've discussed the overly specific stage directions, forced humor, and over-reliance on monologues that hinder this play badly. But are these monologues and characters good? I'm not even gonna let myself finish that sentence. They're not good. Like at all.
This monologue depicts Cindy, canonically the youngest of the group, being sexually assaulted by a person who she thought was a friend. This story is being told through the lens of the glass doll that Cindy had on her dresser, which got knocked over and broke when she was assaulted. Despite continually trying to put the doll back together, there are still cracks on it, and Cindy describes still seeing dreams in the doll's broken eyes. Now, the doll is obviously meant to represent Cindy's lost childhood innocence, as this traumatic event broke any innocence in her. This all sounds very deep, and the doll metaphor is not a bad one at all. The problem with this is the character that Hill decides to give Cindy throughout the rest of the play. Throughout the play, Cindy is portrayed as creepy and insane, someone who has severely lost her mind. Instead of even attempting to allow the audience to understand Cindy's point of view, to get what she's going through and try to get her as a character, Hill decides to make her seem foreign, like someone who is incredibly far gone, and as someone who simply cannot be understood despite her strife being one of the most severe ones listed. This approach is antithetical to working through these moments with victims and helping them through their experience. Cindy is also the only character that Eli saves at the end of the play. We'll discuss the ramifications of this later, but just keep that in mind for now. Milton struggles with OCD. He washes his hands repeatedly, and his monologue is definitely one of the weaker ones, which says a lot. The problem is that there's not a super consistent through line, and it sneaks into an "I'm 14 and this is deep" moment with the line stating that it isn't the voices inside of his head. This monologue depicts people with OCD as crazy in the way that it's written. The monologue has 3 different topics, and it doesn't know which one to focus on. The superstition of a routine, the voices in his head, and germophobia. These are all real reasons why people would have OCD. The problem is that it tries to tackle every reason why someone has OCD. The monologue loses focus and fails to adequately explore who Milton is as a character. This creates the idea that he's erratic, jumping from excuse to excuse without having a logical through line. The rest of this play has Milton mostly in the background, not really doing or saying much, which means that this is really the only characterization we get for him. One last thing I'd like to mention is that the play takes the Cindy route of characterization for Milton too, constantly counting from 1 to 10 over and over just to hammer the fact that he isn't mentally stable. We don't need this hammering in, and frankly it borders as disrespectful to people with OCD. There's not much to say about Lilah's monologue. It's serviceable. If I had to think of a complaint, it'd be that it's too short. There's not much we learn about Lilah through it, so it doesn't really serve its purpose. We learned that she was excited to get her driver's license or something, however this doesn't really tell us anything about her. It's fluff information put in only to give the illusion of a character. I already discussed how Lilah was handled in other parts of the play, so I'll just be moving on from here. Alice, as previously mentioned, is suffering from bulimia nervosa. This disorder was caused by her body image issues due to the unrealistic body standards that society perpetuates. There are parts of this monologue that I don't mind. The sequence describing the process of purging has small interjecting questions like, quote, "Why are bathroom floors always so cold?" This line actually works a lot for me. It makes Alice seem more human and makes this feel like an experience she's had. Unfortunately, this is where my praise ends, as the monologue also has a simile comparing her preparing for this act to preparing to be responsible for the winning basket on a basketball team. Additionally, the motto of hers in the play is, quote, "It's hard being a big-boned girl in a skinny girl world," a phrase that the people I watched this with found hilarious, and it doesn't help the dramatic aspect of this play. The problem is less with the saying or sentiment itself, rather because we're watching a character whom we have really no real reason to care about saying it, and it makes it feel silly and unimportant. We know that this person is fake because this is a play. The way that most plays remedy this fact is by fleshing out the characters so much that they feel like real people. But this doesn't do that. There are no deeper layers to this character, only the surface level of exploration.
Tabitha's monologue centers around her and her boyfriend, who is abusive to her. Tabitha tries to plead her case that he actually loves her and has a funny way of showing it, which is obviously meant to be her coping with this abusive relationship. I don't have much to say on this one. I think it's fairly solid. The problem is her portrayal throughout the rest of the play. Throughout most of the play, Tabitha can be seen quarreling with Cyrus. These moments depict her as someone who is willing to stand up for what she believes is right, and the abusive relationship depicts the opposite. This is not actually a bad thing. The depiction works because people are usually more able to stand up for other people than themselves, and if Tabitha is seen as somewhat delusional about her relationship, it's not a bad depiction. I start to have a problem with the crass mentions of her being beat and weak for taking this abuse. Cyrus makes a rude comment asking when the last time Tabitha was hit and other such questions, which paints Tabitha as someone whose bark is louder than their bite. I believe this stance on victims almost shames them for their victimhood. Tabitha should not be judged for this. These people should help her get through it. Instead, Hill writes a character that offers no hope to people in these situations. Arnold is one of the more nothing characters, meaning that his struggle is comparatively a bit silly to the others described. This isn't necessarily to say that bullying isn't an issue, but the problem is that Hill separates the people who have mental illnesses with people that have a reason to have mental illnesses. This obviously isn't saying that people need to have a reason for a mental illness, but more to say that when you're developing three-dimensional characters, you can't just give them one trait. If you give them multiple traits and show how those traits are connected, it automatically makes a more fleshed out and interesting character. For example, if someone was being bullied for being overweight and therefore developed an eating disorder, you'd have an interesting combination of Arnold and Alice's character traits. Instead, Hill decides to make Arnold sound whiny and give characters like Alice lines that sound silly when spoken when they really should be powerful and dramatic. Arnold talks about how he was set on fire too, which is an absurd thing that I struggle to understand the thought process behind. This far surpasses bullying, but on top of that, this ending sounds comical when it's supposed to sound serious. Why was he lit on fire? What was the point of including that? Is Arnold dead? Well, no, none of these characters are dead. We know that because of this line. Quote, "No, Lilah, we're not dead." Hey, this is just Nick from the edit here. I wanted to kind of explain this last part more because some people might be like, okay, but they still could be dead. Typically, when a character is in a piece of media and they offer an explanation, even if they don't know for sure, if there's nothing in the story that rebukes this, then it's typically seen as true because it's the author explaining it through the character. Anyway, enjoy the rest of the video, or at least try to. And because characters like Will have no reason to have died, this all just makes the line seem stupid and unnecessary. Arnold isn't much more interesting throughout the rest of the play, no jokes to rip into or anything, just kind of a nothing character with little in terms of characterization. Cyrus's monologue is one of the better ones, which isn't saying much given the competition, but there are some good things here. The comparison of a high to a woman is an interesting one that equates Cyrus's addiction to lust. This whole thing lines up with what we know about Cyrus as a character as previously discussed. This comparison, though, isn't perfect, as it somewhat neglects the actual reason why people are forced to stay on whatever substances they're addicted to. Withdrawals and other such effects are completely ignored when discussing this in this play, and they're a big part of this discussion. This unfortunately makes addicts seem like assholes and is detrimental to how addicts are seen in society. There's a theme running through this whole video right now about how this play is detrimental to the understanding of actual victims in these situations. And it's only going to get worse from here, but I just wanted to make sure that we're on the lookout for that right now. Another nothing character, unfortunately. Will is a character that is portrayed as petulant and whiny due to his parents' divorce. Divorce is a serious subject, and it can cause a lot of mental illness in a child, but for whatever reason, Hill didn't feel like William should have gotten that. Instead, believing that it's better if Will just complained about minor things that make him seem unlikable and make him a bad stand-in for kids with separated parents. His specific fixation on where he will spend his birthday is infuriating because it comes off as minor when compared to what people are going through in the rest of the play. I understand that this is a question that people with separated parents may have, but it's also not conducive in this play with people who are talking about, like, eating disorders. When the characters all re-enter and say one line to explain how sad they are at the end, Will enters singing this, quote, "Happy birthday to me, happy birthday to me." This is, again, laughable when compared to the serious monologues of other characters, and it makes it clear that Hill did not plan out this character very well. The fact that his monologue is also the longest is fucking crazy to me. Jen's monologue is her talking about her depression and suicidal thoughts through the lens of a friend. It's an alright monologue. The framing is pretty effective, and her pretending that her friend was going through this as opposed to her, and gradually slipping up with this story over the course of the monologue is pretty well executed. It's a real shame then that Jezz only starts framing herself this way during this monologue. If dissociating is her way of coping, then it should be something consistent, not something that only happens when it's used for a dramatic monologue. Eli is the main character, and so naturally there's a lot to talk about with him. His monologue sees him going to the river and trying to catch a fish, only for his father's lure to get stuck in the fish, forcing him to kill the fish to get the lure out. He also apparently went to the same river and took a swim, nearly drowning before his sister Grace saved him, drowning himself in the process. These stories don't really gel together. Are they the same story? Did they happen on the same trip? Was the fish story a metaphorical retelling of the sister story? Was Eli lying? Well, I don't think it's that last one, because apparently Cyrus knew, and Eli and Cyrus don't really like each other, so this must be like common information. I know some may say that this is a symbolic monologue that is supposed to be deep and representing of certain things, but I don't think that's true. What, his sister's a fish? Okay, what does that mean? Was his sister food? As the main character, Eli is also the only character with an actual emotional arc. This arc connects directly to the theme of the story. I'll talk more about the actual theme itself later, but for now, the arc is Eli learning that he can't save everyone. He can't stop other people from suffering if they want to suffer. Eli throughout the play is constantly looking for a situation to get everyone out of the limbo that they are in, constantly untying characters and trying to get them to leave. As they all ignore him, Grace, his sister, appears and tells him that he can't save everyone. He decides to leave his friends to their own devices, miserable and alone. This arc borders on melodrama, as the whole play does. In fact, borders is the incorrect word. This is melodrama, a pretentious display of themes that Hill thinks is much more clever than it actually is. The way this arc is resolved is with Eli talking to Grace. How does this happen? Is this actually supposed to be the afterlife? Is she real? Well, I'd assume she's real. Had she been a figment of Eli's imagination, it wouldn't make sense for her to tell him that he's innocent when he believes he's guilty. This short, forced emotional conversation is the capstone of this arc, and it sucks. We didn't have the chance to comprehend the relationship between these two characters before this. So how are we supposed to care about this relationship when we literally know nothing about it? I hate this character arc so much, but it's not for this reason alone. Let's finally talk about the worst part of this whole fucking mess. Eli's arc underscores the theme of this play, that being that you can't help everyone with mental illness and therefore you shouldn't even try. Now, this isn't to say that there's not some truth here. Not everyone with mental illness can be saved, but that's not an excuse to give up on those people, and it's not through lack of trying on their part either. Eli ends off his arc by turning to leave, having Cindy call his name and having him turn around to save her, leaving everyone else. This play seems to understand that it isn't Cindy's choice to live with her trauma and therefore she can be saved by Eli. All the other characters are condemned to suffer because they apparently chose to be there and don't want to be saved. Let me remind you of the people that apparently chose their fates, according to Hill. A person with leukemia. A person who's experiencing suicidal thoughts to the point where they're dissociating. A person who is suffering from an eating disorder. A person who is struggling with drug addiction. A person with OCD. And a person who is struggling with an abusive relationship. These are serious problems that need help and guidance to correct. However, Hill decides that they did it to themselves and therefore they don't deserve help. Now, one might say that there are ways of fixing these problems so they don't have to be sad, to which I would nuke one's entire fucking house. Let's take a look at what the options for these characters are. Lilah is on a ticking time bomb. At any point, her cancer could kill her. There's not much she can do. Jezz is suffering from depression and suicidal thoughts to the point where she's dissociating. She could go seek therapy, but she feels ashamed to. She frames everything as her friend because she's ashamed to feel depressed. How would that change if she went to therapy? If she's ashamed to feel these thoughts because of the messages like the ones portrayed in your play, Hill, how is she supposed to get better? Cyrus has a drug problem, as previously discussed. The play never touches on the physiological reasons why a person might stay on drugs and instead frames it like it's entirely his fault. Milton has OCD, a disorder that no one chooses to have, and a disorder that can literally ruin someone's life if not taken care of. Tabitha is in an abusive relationship. To say it is her fault is to victim blame that person who is in a horrific situation. It is despicable. And to compare these serious cases to Arnold getting set on fire in a comical display, or Will complaining about where he will spend his birthday, is actually repulsive. That's not to say that bullying and divorce aren't as traumatic as some of these other things, but the fact that they hyperfixate on making these characters sound as petulant as possible is frustrating. I hate what this play stands for. I hate the injustice it does to people struggling with serious mental illnesses. It genuinely pains me. If you are someone who is struggling with any of these disorders or issues that were in the play, please do not hesitate to reach out. I'm going to leave some phone numbers to the suicide prevention hotline and other mental health hotlines in the description below, so please take care of yourselves and don't watch Fighting Demons. This is not a play that was written for you or to help others understand you. It was made to shame and degrade those with actual mental illnesses while at the same time glorifying it as something cool and edgy. It pains me to think that anyone that watched this play was struggling with these issues and how invalidated and misunderstood they must have felt. The funny thing is that this perspective on mental health is exactly why people are scared to go to therapy. The idea that they're weak for feeling this way, or worse, that it's their fault, gives people pause when they should be seeking professional help. It truly hurts thinking of the ways that this play reflects the disgusting views of mental illness present in our society. The ones that push people away from getting help. The effects of this play are depressing, to say the least, and while I don't believe it was Hill's intention to give off this message, the more I look at these words, the more they paint that story. Even if we're being the most charitable that we can be with this story and saying that maybe it's just saying that you can't save everyone, so you need to be able to move on. That doesn't fix the fact that Eli walks out and abandons his friends at the end of the play. They don't get any resolution. He doesn't help any of them. He doesn't even try after he talks to Grace. Even with Lilah, the character with a terminal illness who really had no ability to come back from it, could have used support from her friend, but that's not in the cards, apparently. I don't hate Angela Hill, if that needed to be said. I hope that she had the best intentions when writing this dumpster fire. I just hate the story she wrote because I hate the message it puts into the world. That's all. If you're struggling with any of these issues, please seek professional help. I'm going to find a way to wrap this all up. I want to preface this with a thank you to everyone who got this far through the video. I truly do appreciate it. I am a person who has struggled with many of the illnesses and experiences listed above. I had an eating disorder when I was in middle school. I was bullied in elementary school. My parents have been separated for almost half my life now, and I had suicidal ideations in 8th grade. Even an attempt. I wanted to tell you that it will get better. You just have to take that first step. So many times in life it's hard to take that first step to getting better, and I understand. It's scary, especially with how society sees mental illness nowadays as something weak, as something that only weak-minded individuals can even have. I used to be scared too, but just remember, you are beautiful, you are enough. No matter how many imperfections you think you have, you'll get through this. I mean, if I can, then you can too. I love you, all of you. Just keep loving yourselves.